Liz McIntyre is a consumer privacy expert, co-author with Dr. Catherine Albrecht of the Spychips book series, and a consultant for my favorite privacy products, the encrypted start mail service based in the Netherlands, and its private search engine startpage.com. Thank you for being with us, Ms. McIntyre.
Well, it's really nice to be with you here, Hervoy. Thanks for inviting me.
Sure. Now, people used to laugh at the prophecies written down in the Bible's book of Revelations concerning some type of mark which would be required for people to buy or sell. With the advent of RFID, biometrics, and microchips, coupled with governments and banks that are working toward a digital and cashless economy, which Bitcoin may even make possible, fewer people seem to be laughing when this subject is brought up. And myself, having lived in numerous countries, I can say from personal experience that there is a very thin line between being able to participate and function within the national economy and being barred from doing so for bureaucratic reasons. Most recently, a Wisconsin company has offered the opportunity for employees to have microchips implanted into their hands. A sociology professor claims that eventually everybody will be microchipped. Not this year or in 2018, but maybe not in our generation, but certainly that of our kids' generation. Let's discuss first what is going on in Wisconsin and then the comments made by the professor. Can you fill us in there?
Absolutely. Well, there's a Wisconsin company called Three Square Market, and they asked their employees to volunteer to be implanted with RFID microchip. These are glass encapsulated microchips that would be embedded in their flesh. Now, these devices communicate from a distance, a short distance. Okay. Now, this was a huge PR deal because this company creates and sells these snack kiosks. These little, I guess they're like miniature storage places like airports, for example, where you walk by and you want a snack. And so their whole concept is, wow, maybe we can sell more of these things, get all this publicity. If we get people microchipped and set up this microchipping technology so that when people go to buy a snack, they simply wave their hand in order to pay. So there would be this chip in them with a unique identification number linked to their bank account. So it would be a cashless type of payment. So this was supposedly voluntary, and the company wanted about 50. They said they anticipated 50 of their employees to get chipped. But of course, this has implications not just for this company. To me, it's a big publicity stunt because, frankly, they're not the first. They claim to be the first. They're not. But also because it's sort of a ridiculous notion that people are going to get chipped so they don't have to dig into their pockets to pull out change in order to pay for snacks. It's sort of a publicity stunt for them, but there are implications beyond that, which I really don't think they've thought about. And I don't think they've really thought about the effects on their employees and really what kind of lawsuits are going to follow, frankly. So really, basically, that's what's going on in Wisconsin. And as you can tell, there are going to be all kinds of implications because of this publicity stunt.
And you say it's not the first time and it's a publicity stunt. How, in the US specifically, how prevalent is this among companies, businesses, and even government agencies? Because perhaps I recall reading a few years ago in Mexico, one government agency had allowed the implanting of microchips into their employees. So in the US, how prevalent is this practice?
Right. Well, not very, and for good reason, because nobody wants these things, because no one wants to be first of all implanted with something that requires implantation within their skin. I mean, it's a big device we're talking about, Hervoy. A lot of times they say it's the size of a grain of rice, but I've never seen a microchip like this, the size of a grain of rice. It's kind of like those chips you put that vets put in your dog or cat to track them. And those are pretty big honking chips. They're not miniature little pieces of grains of rice-sized chips. And also, there are just some real security issues with those and some health issues. So they haven't really gotten far. So that's a good thing. I mean, of course, the government could be doing this with their CIA employees or whatever, we don't know about it. But as far as mainstream, that hasn't really been happening. However, as I said, they're not the first. The first time this happened was back in 2006, and I actually helped uncover the story. A company called City Watcher out of Cincinnati, Ohio, was the first that I know of in the United States to ask their employees to get chipped. And in their case, this company, City Watcher, wanted to secure a vault where they stored sensitive videotape footage. The company was all about taking the videotape footage from the city of Cincinnati, all those video cameras around the city, picking up crimes and other things. And this company was charged with storing these securely so that when there was a court case or whatever, the video footage would be available. So some salesperson came to them and said, "Hey, I've got this great idea for you guys. Hey, right now you've got, a passcode to your vault. Why don't you just have your employees chipped? What a great idea. It'd be so much easier. You wouldn't misplace the code. It'd be so much more secure." So the company owner just decided to buy into this, and a couple of his employees got chipped, actually. But it was very interesting because they really didn't understand the implications of the chipping. And certainly the employees didn't. I actually called up the company and surprisingly got an employee who was about to get chipped and asked him some very basic questions like, well, do you understand how insecure this chip is? That actually it has been hacked by a hacker named Jonathan Westjuice. He said, "No, I did not know that." I said, "Did you know that these chips could possibly migrate in your body?" "No, I didn't know that." And I said, "Well, do you know that this chip is a lot bigger than a grain of rice, and it's really more like a hypodermic injection? And then what do you do when you leave the company?" And he totally turned tail and he ran. As far as I know, he never got chipped. His employer never, completely thought through everything or explained everything. And so then I tracked down the salesperson and I called him up and I said, "Hey, I understand you sold this system to City Watcher. And I've talked to an employee who has no clue as to all the implications." I said, "Did you know that the system you're selling this company really isn't secure, that it's been hacked, and that actually someone has proven that he can clone a chip that's in an employee's arm and pretend to be that employee?" And the salesperson was blown away. He had no clue. So that was a real problem. And in fact, I see the same kind of naivete continuing here in this particular incident in Wisconsin. So many years later, they haven't learned the lesson. They obviously either didn't know the history of this prior chipping because they're claiming to be first, or they're lying. Either way, it's a bad thing. And one of the reasons I think this company is so naive, I read the CEO talking about this, saying, "Oh, if they don't want the chip anymore, it's really easy. You just have to push it out like a splinter." And I'm thinking, really? Does he understand that it would take a surgical procedure to remove a chip? So anyway, there you go. So they're not the first. It's a big publicity stunt. There were problems with it back in 2006, and there are obviously some issues with it today. And I would not be surprised, frankly, Hervoyer, if there are lawsuits to follow, not only over perhaps the insecurity of the product, but employee lawsuits from employees who are wronged or not properly informed about the implications of this technology.
And you mentioned health, and I'd like to talk about the privacy and security implications later on. But briefly, could you just tell us the worst case scenario related to health? You mentioned that the chip, that's the size of the grain of rice, it can migrate. What are the worst health implications?
Well, first of all, it's not the size of a grain of rice that I can tell. I mean, maybe I haven't seen this particular chip, but it looks very much like the other chips, and they were a lot bigger than a grain of rice. The chipping in the past has been done in the fleshy part of the arm. These are being injected between the thumb and the index finger. Okay. And there are some warnings about chips like this. These supposedly do not have a substance on them called biobond, which is supposed to encourage fibrous tissues to grow around them. The concept is that, hey, maybe you want to remove it at some point. It makes it easier if you don't have quite so much stuff growing around it to hold it in. But that also poses a risk because then the chips are more likely to migrate within the body. And so it's in this little place between the thumb and the index finger. But companies selling similar chips warn that if you do any kind of strenuous work, especially during the first couple of weeks when the chip is kind of getting some scar tissue formed around it to hold it a little bit in place, that this could migrate toward a bone. And if it gets toward a bone and the person happens to strain it or move the wrong way, it could actually break the glass. And then you have a serious issue because you've got broken glass and a broken microchip inside your hand that would obviously require some very special attention and likely surgical removal and some scar that would form. There have also been studies that chips similar to this in pets have caused cancers around the chips. Dr. Catherine Albrecht actually did a study on that and found a much higher percentage of cancers, unexpected cancers surrounding microchips in pets. So yes, I think that there are some serious health implications.
Now, Sweden is another country on the microchip radar, as they are swiftly moving toward also a cashless economy. And some Swedish companies have also offered employee implants and even for citizens to board trains. 3,000 people apparently have volunteered to do so, if the reporting is correct. What can you say, now moving away from the US, what can you say about Sweden and this trend globally?
Well, I think that they think this is cool and how efficient it is. But again, if they look at all the past history, they look at the studies, then maybe they're either like taking a big risk and saying, well, we're willing to take the risk, or they're not considering that when they're doing all of this chipping. So I would say that, they may be uninformed. I don't know for sure. Maybe they're willing to take this kind of risk. But at any rate, it's dangerous for the rest of the world for any country to set a precedent like this without clearly stating the risks to the people, because they're selling it like it's just some great, cool fad. They have great, cool people dressed up, in all kinds of cool garb, having chipping parties, saying, hey, this is the thing to do, and encouraging young people to just kind of get on board. Like, you're cool if you do it. So I would say that, I think people should have the right to chip themselves. I think people should have the right to do pretty much whatever they want with their bodies, as long as they're not harming someone else. But I think that there also has to be a line drawn, Hervoyer, where voluntary has to be voluntary. I have to say that when your boss says, hey, I need volunteers to get chipped, how voluntary is that? I mean, in any country of the world, this has to be important. Really, people have to have, first of all, there has to be informed consent where everything is laid out on the table. All the risks are put out. People know exactly what they're getting into. Okay. And then it really, truly has to be voluntary. And if your employer is saying, hey, do this, especially if it's a big deal where they're trying to make it a big thing and make it big PR for their company. If you're a manager in a company, or even if you're just, a regular employee and you want to get ahead in that company or even stay employed, you might think twice. You might say, wow, if I don't get this chip, if I don't get on board, if I'm not cool, I won't have friends in the company. I mean, I might not get promoted. Right. So I think that we really need to take a serious look at this and what voluntary really is, and really whether it is voluntary.
And you kind of alluded to this type of peer pressure in a sense. I finally wanted to talk about China and not leave them out, and maybe if there's any other country where you've heard microchip implants being used. I didn't find anything recently on China, but they have introduced a system called Sesame Credits, which is based on gamification that is supposed to become mandatory in the future, which would track citizens' every action and reward them or punish them accordingly. They've locked down the internet. We know about that, the Great Firewall, VPNs, and Facebook. And recently they've proposed an online user ID for every citizen. I guess it's just a matter of time before Chinese companies or the government start offering microchips. Can you tell us anything about China, and the direction that it's headed, and any other region of the world where you've heard about microchip implants being used?
Well, so far, I haven't heard of any forced government chipping programs in other countries. Of course, those could be kept quite quiet. But I definitely see where this could be used with a system like Sesame Credit, which I'm very familiar with, by the way. And it's just a horrible system, and an example of where if you don't get on board, you're ostracized or you're hurt in some way. Because with Sesame Credit, as you probably know, citizens get points for being quote unquote good citizens, and good citizens don't criticize the government. Good citizens, do positive things and not what is considered negative, which could be protesting in the streets against something that they feel is, very much against humanity. And so the microchipping would fit in so well with that. I could actually see an extension of that program and it might not even be the government. I mean, Sesame Credit is actually through private companies, and the government is involved in it, is my understanding. I mean, it could be a private company that says, hey, Sesame Credit people, we've got this great idea. We've got this microchip, get this chip and get extra points, because right now, as you accumulate points, as you know, it makes it easier for you to get credit. It makes it easier for you to get, say, a passport, right? So they can encourage this kind of thing and make people basically trackable from a short distance, but nonetheless trackable, and perhaps uniquely identified when they travel. Perhaps at some point, to get into a store or to get, say, a discount at a store, you might have to wave your hand and uniquely identify yourself, which takes away the anonymity, right, of payment. Takes away the anonymity of travel and free pursuits. So I think that this could be just such a humanitarian crisis if a country like China were to, either by carrot or stick method, endeavor to have its population chipped.
And before we move away slightly from the topic of microchips, what are your thoughts on the comments of this sociology professor who says that the next generation everybody will be microchipped? Do you see a trend in that direction, or is he also trying to garner publicity?
I think looking to the future, it's not hard to extrapolate, and I don't blame him. I mean, I hope that's not the case, and I really do believe, Hervoye, that we need laws. I've been part of proposing laws in the United States, and some states have already enacted laws that prohibit forced human chipping. I would say that those have to be extended to prohibit any kind of technology that would enable people to be tracked through their persons. That would include microchipping. It would include RFID type or NFC type technology that doesn't necessarily have to be embedded in your body, but that could be stamped on you. I've seen patents where this kind of communication technology could actually be an electronic tattoo. So, when the Bible talks about, for example, the mark of the beast, which some people associate with this technology, and there being a mark on the right hand or forehead, an electronic tattoo that could communicate in a similar manner could very well fulfill that kind of a prophecy. But whether or not it does, it's still a privacy risk. So we need to have laws that prevent any kind of marks or embedded devices, any kind of technology that would track human beings. And I say that if you think it's never going to happen, it's far-fetched, then what's the point? What's the problem? Why would somebody be opposed to it? Frankly, if we are a disaster away. We see the disaster now in Houston, Texas, with all of the flooding going on. Look at all the people who have been displaced. I could see a situation where the government could say, wow, we need to keep track of all these people. We don't know where they are. It would just make so much sense to go out there with these microchips and embed them in their flesh, right? And that way we have a way to uniquely identify them. We know they're only getting aid one time, and we can move them easily. This kind of thing has happened before in floods, by the way, but not with live people. The Verichip Corporation, which by the way, has gotten out of its microchipping business. That's moved on to other companies because they took such hell for it. They kind of sold off that division. But they were very interested and got involved with the government in chipping corpses in the last big flood in the United States with Hurricane Katrina, if you recall, years ago. They chipped people who were dead because they said it would make it easier to track those people. And that met with a lot of opposition. People really weren't given a choice at that point. So, governments are interested in this. We've had the former U.S. Secretary of Health and Human Services, Tommy Thompson. When he left office, he went to the board of the Microchip Corporation and tried to sell all Americans on getting microchips to hold their medical records. Never mind that it was a bad idea and a horrible way to store medical records. So you've seen government interest. You see the trains in Sweden. There have been government initiatives along these lines. And so for this professor to say that one day we'll all be chipped is not as far-fetched as it might seem. It could be just a disaster away, and it could be generations away. But regardless, let's make laws now so that people do not have to be tracked, because we have the foresight now to prevent a very serious human rights breach, a very serious human rights issue by saying you can't force people to do it.
And I think people should go watch Black Mirror, that TV show on Netflix. I'm not sure how familiar you are with it, but it's very thought-provoking. And I live in a country that's currently in Central Asia. It's a very beautiful country, wonderful country. But I was shocked to discover that every time a citizen or a foreigner leaves this country and returns, we must go to a medical center, get a blood test to confirm that we don't have HIV, and then we have 5 days to register with the police. And if you don't do that, on your 6th day, you're looking at $100 fine each day and ultimately prison. So imagine this technology you're discussing, how that could mesh well with a system such as this. But moving on a little bit, we've seen recent cases of Google taking down entire accounts of people who do not subscribe to Google's political ideology, and they've even taken down random people, such as most recently a statistics professor. And by taking down accounts, that includes not just YouTube, but your Gmail, Google Drive, Google Photos account, the whole 9 yards. I still marvel at people who are so quick to exchange their privacy for the convenience of services such as Google and their motto of, "I have nothing to hide." How do you respond to these actions by companies such as Google and people who put such blind faith into government-connected tech companies?
Yeah, and there's so many of them, and especially U.S.-based companies. I hate to say this, I live in the United States, and we have a real issue here because our surveillance laws completely work against consumers. We think that a company in the United States might offer us privacy, but even the best companies with the best privacy policies here, they could be compromised to become honeypots overnight. We have what we call here national security letters and gag orders. Are you familiar with those?
Yes, of course.
Right. And of course, if a government agent decides that agent needs to get into a company and change that technology in some way, or get information from a company, perhaps go into somebody's account that's supposed to be privacy protected, perhaps go into the Amazon server system, which so many privacy companies run on Amazon Web Services. I mean, it's very possible they can go in with this order saying we have the right, what we need to do here, and you can't tell a soul about it. And we recently saw this happen with a very upstanding company, and I was so saddened to see that this happened to them. But RiseUp.net, which is, an email service that is dedicated to helping activists and really have they've always had a fantastic privacy policy where they promise, hey, we're here for you. We're trying to support activists and journalists. We don't want anybody getting your information, so trust us. And they really were sincere about that. But last fall, the government came in and said they needed information and got it. And I know there was a blog post out. This company said they fought against it, but they simply couldn't stand it. They couldn't up to it because it's too expensive to fight the government, right? They eventually had to give in and break their own privacy policy. So this is a big deal. So when you're talking about companies in the United States, any companies in the United States, and especially ones that are offering privacy, you have to be very, very careful because you have to understand that they could be compromised pretty much at any time. So the laws need to change on that. And on the second point, on free speech, this is something that is very close to my heart. I mean, this is one reason the United States is such a great country, and there are other countries around the world that protect free speech as well. But the United States has been a standout historically in this particular area, giving people the right to express themselves freely as long as they're not causing someone injury. For example, you can't walk into a theater and yell fire because you could kill people doing that. But other than that, I mean, you have a right to say things, even though they're unpopular. You have the right to criticize the government. You have the right to criticize the president. And likewise, you have the right to say you love the president or the government. But we're seeing right now where there's been an impetus to shut down free speech on the part of companies, on the part of government, and on the part of, frankly, of citizens themselves, groups themselves who oppose. And I understand there's a lot of hate speech out there. I hate it. I hate hate speech. But as much as I hate hate speech, I would support the right for someone to say what they have to say as long as they're not hurting somebody, just because I need to be able to oppose them. And I don't ever want anyone telling me what I can or cannot say or think. And so, yeah, I oppose when people or organizations, their voices are squelched because perhaps their speech is not welcome. So, we have to, as a society, decide, are some companies too large? Are they too much in the public interest that we have to somehow regulate the fact that, they can't just shut someone down because they have an unpopular opinion? But of course, right now, when you're talking about Google, that is a free company and they have a right to make their own decisions at this point. But I will say this, that I've also done some investigation on this, because it's been such an important issue to me. And especially since, search engines like the one I work with, we take results from other search engines. Like we use Google. I know that there are other search engines that use Yahoo and Bing and so on. And so effects to what they do, it impacts, other services. And I've seen some services claim, some organizations claim they've been censored or somehow demoted, and saying that their results have been somehow affected by policies by these companies. And I've tried to find evidence for that. And in many cases, I've actually spent hours on this. And in many cases, frankly, a lot of these organizations need some help with what's called SEO, right? I guess you're familiar with that, which is a way of making sure you speak properly, the language that these spiders talk, these spiders that go around and index the internet. And I found a lot of these sites that are complaining they've lost people or they're not getting as high a ranking don't have some very basic things that they should be doing, like keywords. Keywords are very important. These are words that signal to a search engine, hey, here's an important topic. We're talking about this important topic. So the search engine doesn't get that. So they don't know that they're necessarily talking about this important topic. I've seen basic things like titles of pages not being in there. We've seen pages without any titles at all. And so when you have a search engine spider and there's no title, they go, well, this it's almost like the page doesn't really exist or isn't as important. So I think we need to all be auditors in this way, because this is such an important human rights issue. It's such an important freedom issue, such an important free speech issue. We need to get in there like auditors, and we need to go in and find the real reason for any kind of reported degradation of service or or censorship and find out, is this really true? Or is there something else that we all need to be doing to make sure that our voices are properly heard? Does this make sense?
Yeah, and that's a good point. I think people can look up one of America's top psychologists, Brian Epstein, I believe is his name, and he wrote a great article called "The New Mind Control," I think, last year, which discusses exactly what you're saying, how Google can effectively, in terms of elections, they can swing the election just based on their the search results that are presented. And it's this very subtle manipulation is almost pretty much undetectable, Epstein writes. And going back to what you mentioned about the national security letters real quick, you mentioned how Rise Up was served a letter and they had to shut down. The same happened to LavaBit, which was Edward Snowden's email service. And just to clarify,
Correct.
those were US based companies. StartMail is based in the Netherlands, so that cannot happen to StartMail, correct?
But it is a very important, yes. The startpage.com, our private search engine, and startmail.com, the private email service, are based in the Netherlands. And of course, the EU generally has much better privacy laws than most other places in the world. And you can't just go in there, and a government can't just go in there and force them to change their technology and not talk about it. There is no equivalent to the U.S. national security letter and gag order. And so that's why it's so important when you're choosing services like VPNs, which now are so important because people realize their ISPs might be spying on them and marketers are spying on them. And of course, whenever a private company gets information, the government can get it too. So people choose VPNs, and that's like a really important service because that anything that goes through the VPN, I mean, that could be picked up if it were a malicious company or a company that had been turned into a honeypot. So when you're choosing a product or a privacy product or service, you need to look not only at the product or service and their promises, but where they are located and whether those laws are advantageous and will truly protect you. Because if you pick up a service in the US, as good as they might sound, I mean, what good is it if the government could go in at any time and completely change that privacy policy and you'd never be the wiser?
Mm-hmm. And let's talk about StartMail and StartPage and how things are going with those services. You recently, in another interview, stated that companies that siphon personal data will be replaced by privacy-friendly companies such as StartPage.com and StartMail.com. We can add a few others, such as the private cloud service, Spider Oak, or new social media alternatives such as Gab, Minds, and VidMe. When you and I were communicating to set up this interview, you sent me an encrypted email via StartMail, and I kind of freaked out because I haven't decrypted it. I haven't decrypted an email in ages, since very few people I know use encrypted email. And so I thought I wouldn't be able to read your message, but I was able to easily decrypt it with my StartMail account. And I just love the ease with which we were able to communicate securely. I'm starting to see a very slow growth in the use of email encryption and hope it becomes commonplace in the future. How are StartMail and StartPage doing in the free market of surveillance capitalism dominated by giants such as Google?
Well, of course, we have to get the word out. We're a smaller company than Google, for example, and frankly, we need to be added to more browsers. We'd love to be added to, for example, Safari. Right now, Safari only has U.S.-based companies as search engines. Check it out. You can use us if you're using Safari, but it's not easy. We're not one of the easy default ones to add. So I would say that's really important. Because if you don't see us when you're setting everything up and you don't know about us, how are you going to ever find us? So we try to get the word out, and we really appreciate anyone out there who would, send out the word to their friends and family and talk about the importance and about how much they appreciate that StartPage delivers, actual Google results, but in total privacy. And in fact, in addition to that, I guess Hervoyer, we offer a unique free proxy with every search result. So once you do your search, get these results back, you could also click the optional proxy button to visit the third-party website privately as well. And when you do that, your ISP doesn't see you, of course, because we use encryption anyway. We don't see what you're doing because we don't log any personal information, and the third-party website does not see you. Okay, neither does Google, of course. So you can actually visit a third-party website through Start Page and not be tracked. No one will know that you're there. In addition, because it's through our proxy, the marketers there won't know you're there, so they can't download any kind of malware or spyware or adware onto your computer. So it's beneficial in so many ways. And so I encourage people who use Start Page already and love it to also explore that proxy option. Start Mail is doing well. Right now, we're actually in a design behind the scenes, and we can't wait to reveal probably in the beginning of 2018, a brand new, wonderful new interface. But people love our service. And as you say, it's really easy to use PGP encryption, which traditionally has been so hard to use if you've tried to set it up. I mean, I've done it myself. And so we hope that because the service is so easy to use, that more people will be able to encrypt their emails. And the nice thing about Start Mail is that it works outside of Start Mail. So you can communicate with people who have PGP who are on other services as well that allow that, which is kind of unique because a lot of the other services force you to use their service only. And even people without encryption who you want to communicate with, if you're on Start Mail, you can send them a message that will be encrypted just using a password that you agree upon. And those people, even if they don't have a Start Mail account, can write back encrypted as well and even attach documents. So we feel like that's providing a great service, not only to the people who get Start Mail accounts, but to the whole world, because that expands the number of people who can communicate encrypted and protect their privacy.
And I'm happy that I became a StartMail user a few years ago after hearing lately what's been happening, such as with the Canadian professor Jordan Peterson or this other statistician who they had their Google accounts abruptly for no reason canceled, and they had years of correspondence, email, and contacts in those accounts. So at least with a service like StartMail, I could feel safer that won't happen because I'm paying for the service. It costs $60 a year, and you guys, it's really cool that you offer a second email account for a friend or family. And here's my final question before giving you the final word regarding surveillance. One of Edward Snowden's strongest points has been that of turnkey tyranny. What do you see for the future? Do you see us moving toward some form of dystopia?
It's very possible. I'm really hoping that people wake up, and I think they are, as we see more and more people turning to privacy services. If you go places like I go and talk to people I talk to in my world, people are on top of this and they're fighting back. I think you see some fighting back already with another issue that's really close to my heart, Hervoye, which is net neutrality. It's something I've been fighting for, and it's all about control of the internet. And of course, controlling the internet is about controlling free speech. It goes hand in hand with all the things that you talked about sites being taken down and so on. Net neutrality is about treating all traffic equally, so everybody has access to the internet, and we don't have big companies that can go in and control what we see and what we do on the internet. And that's really, really important. It's an issue right now in the United States because the United States Federal Communication Commission, led by Ajit Pai, who's the new FCC chairman, he wants to roll back net neutrality in the United States so that these big companies like Comcast, Verizon, AT&T can call the shots, and they could basically tell people, hey, we don't want you to stream this Netflix because it takes up too much of our bandwidth. So we're just going to slow it down. We're going to throttle that speed. Or perhaps at some point, which Comcast tried in the past, to say, hey, we don't want you to use that VPN because frankly, we want to spy on you, right? Or if you want a VPN to protect yourself, of course not from us, because we have a right to know what you're doing on the internet. You have to use our proprietary VPN product for only $79.95 per month, So this is an extremely important human rights issue right now. And it not only affects the United States, but this vote that is coming up to roll back net neutrality in the United States is going to affect the entire world, because the internet, Hervoye, belongs to the entire world, right? I mean, who can claim they own the internet? I mean, the internet is all of us. It's what we've created. It has become the world's town square, right? And the world's biggest free open marketplace, where everybody is supposed to have a level playing field where anyone can compete. It's a great place for innovation at this point. There are problems, but generally speaking, it's a great place for innovation. And if the United States changes its policies and rolls back net neutrality, rolls back what's called Title II protections that were put in place a few years ago, if they roll that back, then this could be a very serious problem for human rights. And anybody who's interested in fighting this, I know the United States, I think 20 million people commented to the FCC. I mean, we're talking citizens. So you talk about, are people aware of this? Can we have a dystopia? I mean, people are on top of this issue, and they're starting to wake up to this and how this could affect, their free speech and of course associated things like privacy and so on. And so I believe issues like this are going to be a catalyst for stopping this kind of thing. And while I'm here, you said I could talk about a little bit about, something that's close to my heart. And again, this is close to my heart. I'm working with some organizations right now to put together a letter from the rest of the world, because the FCC, in my opinion, needs to hear from the entire world. The United States is not an island unto itself, and the internet does not belong to the United States. The internet belongs to the world. And what I'm trying to do is get the entire world to send a strong message to the FCC. I'm working with Fight for the Future. We're planning, and we really want to put together an open letter from the world, from businesses, from organizations, to sign onto a letter to let the FCC know, hey, think about us too. You are not an island. Think twice before you roll back those net neutrality provisions, because you're going to hurt every single one of us. So if anybody is interested in working on this issue, if there are any companies, any organizations, anybody out there who is interested in signing on to an international letter, this would be from businesses and organizations outside the United States. We're going to be doing this. We're going to be getting this together here in September 2017. I encourage you, please contact me. You can reach out to me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is at Liz McIntyre. That's LizMcintyre. Follow me. I'll follow you back. Let's talk about getting you signed on to a letter. Let's fight this. Let's not only fight this, let's fight any issues related to incursions on our privacy, incursions on our human rights. Let's get together and stop what you say very clearly, Hervoye, could become, we're going to stop that. Let's actively work on that. And I'm here and I'm ready to go to work.
Well, sign me up. You mentioned.
Well, I'm going to have you sign on. You can sign on to that letter for sure.
And you mentioned the Fight for the Future. I think I subscribe to their social media, and I also like the Electronic Frontier Foundation. And any final thoughts to leave us with, and how can people best follow your work?
Well, of course, please use startpage.com, the private search engine, and also, startmail.com for email, great services, and I do consult with them. Please, I'm on Twitter. I'd love to connect with you. I'm also very frequently at Reddit at the subreddit for privacy and privacy tools IO. Great places. So I hope that we can connect up and work on some of these really, really important issues.
All right. Well, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Hervoye. Very nice speaking with you.